Hello, happy Equinox Day. Welcome to Slooh. You are joining me and Paul Cox and a few special other guests as we celebrate today's equinox and moon. It's a two celestial event day, so it's a big day here for us. So welcome, and hi, Paul Cox.
Hi there, Paige. It's not just Brexit dark clouds hanging over the UK today. We haven't seen the sun at all on the first day of spring down here, which in the southwest of England actually isn't that unusual. But anyway,
I am
it's
sorry to
great
hear
to be
that.
here. Well, but look at these views that we've got here, though. You know, the Canary Islands Observatory is stunningly clear, and we've got some great views, haven't we, today?
We have good views here in the northeast of the US as well. I'm in New Jersey, but we have 55 degrees and sunny. But I just turned on the radio this morning that this day last year, Philadelphia had 7 inches of snow. So we're having a good equinox this year. But
But
yeah,
that's
it
great.
certainly doesn't. Yeah, yeah,
But this is a
it
great,
certainly doesn't.
great event for
Yeah.
early evening viewing, because you can watch it just as we're going to do over the next hour, isn't it?
Hmm.
We're going to be watching the sun set in the west for equinox to celebrate equinox, but of course, at the same time as the sunset, a full moon rises, and tonight's supermoon is going to be rising in the east at the same time. One goes up, one goes down. So
Hmm.
anybody who has got clear skies tonight, make sure you get to some high ground so you can have a clear west horizon to see the sunset and a clear eastern horizon to see the supermoon rising. It really will be quite special.
So what are we looking at here in our live views? We're at the Slough Observatory in the Canary Islands. What feeds do we have today?
Well, that's right. And you can see all of the professional telescope facilities here. We've got some of the largest telescopes in the world here. But the telescopes that Slooh's members control every night are also located here at Slooh's flagship observatory. It's at the Institute of Astrophysics of the Canary Islands, 8,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, about 300 miles off the west coast of Africa. And we've also got some very special views. We don't just have nighttime telescopes at Slooh, but we also have our highly specialized solar telescope. And we've got some live views of this at the moment. Look at this. Look at that page. That is our local star
Gorgeous.
live. What do you make of
Hmm.
that?
And if you're watching on Slooh.com in the Space Situation Room, you'll see a couple tabs underneath of the main show. And if you click on them, you can see the live feeds along with us, and you can also take pictures. There's a camera button just below the live feed. So if you pop over there, you can capture this yourself right now because we're looking at some beautiful surface features of the sun um, in
And we'll
our
talk
Slooh
about
solar
those.
telescope. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about those a little bit later, but what we're going to see over the next, this is not the perfect time to be viewing in this telescope. The best solar observing is done early in the morning, kind of when the sun is above 30 degrees, but the surrounding land hasn't heated up because you get a lot of heat and the thermal currents that kind of disturb the view. And that's what you can see in this live video stream. You can see the sun kind of shimmering about a little bit, and that's all of the heat from the sun beating down on the ground and the observatory, and it's kind of disturbing that view. But we've also got, so what we're going to see here, Paige, in about 3/4 of an hour is, this is orientated quite strangely, but we're going to start to see some kind of dark stuff coming in, some dark fingers coming in from the right-hand side of this image stream. And that is going to be the sun setting behind the local bushes, the local flora and fauna. So that's going to look really, really cool. I think that's going to be on happening when you've got our special guest on today, Dr. Mike Shaw.
Yes.
But
Hmm.
we've also got, so as that's setting, we've also got this view. And actually, this is the one that I'm kind of excited about. Now, this is what's called the Pico del Tedicam. Now, if you look carefully, about a third in from the left-hand side of that image, you can just see some little white dots on top of the
Hmm.
ridge of this volcanic island. And that's the observatory. Those are all of the domes that we were just looking at in our observatory panorama. But what's special tonight is because a full moon rises as the sun sets. This
Right.
is on top of a volcanic peak, a very defined volcanic peak. And what we'll see over probably the next 20 minutes, we'll start to see the shadow of that peak, Pico del Tedi, cast over first towards the observatory, but then right over to the horizon. And it's so distinctive, and we might see some incredible kind of shadows on the Earth's atmosphere, kind of spanning out from that. But because the sun's behind us, the shadow's pointing direct in front of us, it means that that shadow is pointing directly east. So all we've got to do is keep a look at the peak of that shadow, and that's where we're going to see the supermoon rising. So everybody keep your eyes open in this feed after we've seen the sunset in the solar telescope. We've also got a live video stream from our dome cam. Now, Slooh members are used to seeing this. This is one that we use every day to keep an eye on the domes and stuff like that. And what we see there is the sun. We can see two domes there, the big white things. We are actually going to open the domes live a little bit later on as soon as the sun goes down, and they do look great, and we'll see the telescopes inside. And in a couple of minutes time as well, we kind of pan this over and we'll open up dome 3, and that's the one that's got that solar telescoping, so viewers will be able to see that. But when the sun sets, we're going to pan this camera all the way over to the eastern horizon so that we can see that Pico del Tedi cam shadow and the supermoon rising. It's going to be quite small in this view, but it'll still be worthwhile seeing. Those are our feeds tonight, Paige. Pretty cool, eh?
It is. This isn't something we usually do. Our shows usually happen when all of our nighttime telescopes are on in the Canary Islands. And so this is unique. So if you're watching, or if you're unsure if you want to stop work and tune in, we encourage it, because it's not often that we watch the sunset over the domes. It's going to be really special. We also have a special announcement at the end of the show that I'm not going to give away anything about right now. But yeah, we have an exciting announcement to make. So you'll want to
Paige, we've had a challenge that we set our members recently, didn't we? The Supermoon Trilogy Challenge. What was that all about?
Yeah. So lately we've been doing challenges around our shows, just trying to get you to, observe for yourself and do it yourself and share with us what you've done. And so we've had a couple Supermoon challenges. And so for this one, we thought that we would do the Supermoon Trilogy Challenge. This is tonight as the third and final Supermoon of 2019. And so the challenge is, have you taken a picture with us or an image from our live feeds for the past two supermoons that were in January and February? And then can you share that with us with your third one? So obviously you can't really participate before today's show, but if you're all the way through today's show, you'll be able to get an image of the moon by the end, and throughout the night, you can share your Supermoon Trilogy with us afterwards. But what we did have also is we had some members that participated in their own way, which was interesting to see how they sort of took this loose challenge, because it really wasn't well defined. It was just sort of like have you been following along, and what are you doing with your moon feeds? And so this is from Slooh member Carol Botha. We're calling it her moon doodle. So she took a zoomed in image of the lunar surface, and then she's an artist and she sketched it herself, and it really looks fabulous, Carol. This is awesome. You're really pulling my heartstrings here with the art. I love it. We also have from Slooh member Cameron McEwing another zoomed in image of the moon with different lunar surface features being pointed out, just a different way. It's interesting to see the way that our members differently approach these sorts of events. This is kind of exactly how the show is going to go. There's the science, there's the art, there's the culture. We do it all.
Exactly.
And our members
I think those are both great, though. They really are great.
So if you want to ask questions on the show, we are streaming on Facebook and Twitter and Twitch. You're welcome to always ask questions there, but we really encourage questions on our discussion boards, because that means you're watching at slooh.com, where you're able to use the camera feature and take the images that we're talking about from our live feeds. So we'll always be checking the discussion boards for questions first. Please do ask questions during the show. We'll get to them by the end. But right now we're going to go to a quick little break, and then Paul Cox and I will be back to talk about the sun and the equinox and the science part of this, and what goes into making an equinox and what it means. We'll be right back.
celebration of every magical moment in the night sky. For just $60, you can give the budding space explorer in your life the gift of a full year of Slooh membership. It's available now at Slooh.com. We're excited to announce the release of our first book, The Saturn Above It, an anthology of short fiction about space. Available now at Slooh.com. We're excited to announce the release of our first book, The Saturn Above It, an anthology of short fiction about space. Available now at Slooh.com.
And we're back. Welcome to our Moon celebration. We are looking at the Slooh Canary Island dome opening. Woo. Look at that. There it goes. What are we looking
right
at, Paul?
cue.
What instrument are we looking at?
Well, this is our Dome 3. So we have 3 domes at the Canary Islands Observatory. And this particular dome actually houses 3 telescopes because we've squeezed them in there incredibly tightly. The other 2 domes hold our 2 biggest nighttime telescopes, a half-meter telescope, which is a 20-inch primary mirror and stuff like that. But in here, the thing that we can see just on the left there, it's difficult to see with all the shadow there, but you just see the red bit. That is, on top of that is the Slooh Solar Telescope, which is what we've been looking at. The white telescope that we can just see on the right-hand side, kind of tucked down, hidden from the sun. That's our Canary 3 Deep Sky Telescope. Great for very wide fields of view, but unfortunately is badly affected by moonlight. So tonight, it's the views there won't be great. But the other one, tucked in behind the solar telescope, is a 14-inch telescope. That's about 356 millimeters. That's called our Solar System Telescope, Canary 4 Solar System. And that's the one that Cameron McEwing used for that image that we just shared. So 3 telescopes all tightly grouped, packed. There is literally, Paige, a centimeter, it's about 1/4 of an inch, half an inch between those telescopes as they're moving together. It's lovely to watch in the evening.
Sounds like it could be a very graceful ballet or a very scary event.
It's a graceful ballet, yeah. As long as nobody changes anything, it's a graceful ballet. Otherwise, it's crashing glass and mirrors.
Right. Yes. Okay. So no earthquakes.
Yeah. Now, Paige, we are going to be talking properly now about you say equinox, I say equinox.
I didn't even notice that.
No, yeah, it's just it's an English thing, but actually equi is probably a far better pronunciation of the word if you think about the Latin and stuff like that. But what is equinox, and what does it mean astronomically? What's going on today that's different to any other day?
So this, and something we're going to talk about in a few minutes, so I won't go into detail about it now, is basically it's supposed to be centered around when we have equal day and night. And this happens twice a year, around March 20th and around September 23rd. And depending on what hemisphere you're in is what season this is bringing. So in the northern hemisphere, it's bringing our spring, and in the southern hemisphere, it is bringing fall. But this is because of the sun, the Earth's path around the sun, and our axial tilt. So our Earth is tilted at about a 23-degree angle to the sun. And so this is what causes the seasons. And so if you're looking at this diagram, you can see if we look at it from like a very Earth-centric way, a geocentric way, we're watching the sun's ecliptic path through the Earth's sky. And so in June, in the northern hemisphere, for example, we see the sun reach the highest point in our sky, whereas in December, we see it reach the lowest. And then on the equinox is when it cuts directly through the middle. So the equinox is when the ecliptic and the equator, the celestial equator, sort of line up. So we have this twice a year. And then based on which hemisphere you're in and the axial tilt is whether you're getting warmer weather or colder weather coming after the equinox.
And one of the interesting things, we kind of hinted at it at the beginning, and in fact, I'm going to talk to Helen Avery about this a little bit later on when we talk about some of the monuments, churches, castles even. I think you're going to be talking about it with Dr. Mike Shaw as well, Paige. You know, that on equinox, wherever you are on Earth, the sun rises exactly in the east and sets exactly in the west. So if you ever want to lay anything out in your garden or anything like that, today's a really good day to do that. Wherever you see the sun set tonight, you know that that is perfectly west. And just as this diagram actually shows us, because one of the things, of course, with equinox, certainly for us in the northern hemisphere, where it's vernal equinox or spring equinox, is today marks the day when days get longer. Unfortunately, for all of our Slooh members down in New Zealand and South Africa and Australia and elsewhere, unfortunately, their nights are going to start getting longer. So,
and then we switch again in September.
exactly, yeah. So swings and
yeah. But yeah, so I really like this diagram that we have up, because if you're looking at A, B, and C, that's basically what I was saying about the sun being the highest point in the sky versus the lowest point, and then at the equinox, it's equal day and night. We'll discuss that in a minute, but it's essentially equal day and night. And then I really like how we show the D, like if you're looking A, B, C, and D, so at a different latitude, what this would actually mean for you. That's cool. I like this.
So, you know, we can see that at certain latitudes, actually, you can land up, you know, nearer the poles, having, you know, these prolonged daytimes that last, you know, several weeks.
24 hours of daylight if you're at 80 degrees.
Exactly. So, you know, long days or nights lasting weeks and days lasting weeks as well during the summer months. So.
I was in Sweden in June one year for a astronomy conference, and it stayed light out until about 1 in the morning, and then we hit twilight until about 3 a.m. It was bananas. It was just, it was the coolest thing I've ever seen.
That must really screw with your natural circadian rhythms and stuff like that. The other thing I like, Paige, about the equinoxes twice a year is it's the best time of year to see a phenomenon that I love. And actually, if we can go to the Slooh dome cam, not the dome cam, sorry, the all sky stream, because if members look at this image later on tonight, they're going to be able to see in the west, so that's off to the right of the image, what looks like a cone of whitish, wispy cloud almost. And that's the zodiacal light. And it's the best time to see it because at this time of year, as the sun rises in the east and sets, it's actually the shortest sunsets that we get because the ecliptic, the path of the sun, is hitting the horizon perpendicularly. So it's going straight down. So in the if we hop over to the all sky view, that's where people will see this zodiacal light. Now, have you ever seen that personally, Paige? You need really dark skies to see it. Well, keep an eye open in this view later on tonight. You can see it in the first kind of 30 to 60 minutes after darkness falls. And all we're doing is we're looking at what, well, I say all, I think it's really exciting. What we're looking at is the kind of dust trail left over thousands of years from all of the comets that pass through the solar system. And that dust tends to accumulate along the ecliptic, in other words, where the planets and the orbit the sun. And we're kind of seeing a wedge of that side on, still being reflected by the sun. I think in the Middle East, the Arabs call it a false dusk and a false dawn, because it really can be quite bright.
So why don't we hop over to the solar scope and talk a little bit about what we see, like what we're looking at in these, at the features of the sun.
Yeah, because today has been a really, really nice day. As soon as we switched this on this morning, we were seeing this.
You were just mentioning that February was a month of no sunspots.
Yes, it's a record for a very long time. It's been, I'm not sure whether I think it's years since we last had an entire calendar month. Of course, it was February, so it's slightly shorter, but with no sunspots appearing at all. So, Paige, that's rare, but you know, solar activity is kind of cyclical, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. So it comes in an 11-year cycle, um, with maximum and minimum amounts of solar activity. And that has to do with the magnetic field of the sun. So right now we're in a minimum, or we're approaching, just coming out of it. We're just coming out of the
Well,
minimum.
a lot of solar physicists actually saw last month as being the marker of minimum.
Okay. Right.
So it's never a pure science, because suddenly we land up having a week like
Right.
last week, or yeah, it was last week in the solar telescope. We see these fabulous features. And it's a little bit fuzzy at the moment because don't forget the ground's heated up and stuff like that. But what we can see here, Paige, is three very distinct
Hmm.
solar features. If anybody wants to see these at their optimum, then hop over to the Slooh homepage, because we have what's called the observation log, where members, we basically hand our homepage over to members to share the very best photos that they've got. Skip back through some of those to some of these views this morning. And this very bright region that we're seeing here was so crisp. It looked absolutely astonishing this morning. And this one page, this gives us a very good uh, idea of the different types of solar
Right.
features that we can see in the solar telescope, obviously, whenever they're there. How about talking us through those?
Okay, yeah. So before we start, in the bottom left corner, you're going to see this little blue dot and it says Earth to
Yeah.
scale. So just as you look at these spots on the sun, keep in mind like what size they are and how much bigger they are than our entire planet. So anything that's hanging off of the limb of the sun, anything that's sort of like looking like it might detach and float into space and become a solar flare, we're calling is a prominence. So when it looks like it appears to like come off of the sun and then reattach, that's called a solar prominence. And when that rounds in front of us, so the solar prominence is because we're seeing it against the dark night sky, but when as the sun rotates and it comes into view and we're looking at it head on, you're seeing a filament. And so that's over by the left, like the darker spot on the sun,
And
and
Paige,
bottom.
these are huge plumes of superheated plasma, aren't they?
Hmm.
Excited gas, which are being sculpted by the magnetic field lines that kind of break through the surface of the sun.
Right. They break through and then they reconnect. And the magnetic activity of the sun is just, it's so exotic and crazy. And it's actually not really well understood. And so, why these plasma streams sort of break off and reconnect in random locations is a big field of study. But that's what we're watching happen. And occasionally they'll completely break off and fly over towards the Earth. Here is a
Oh, I didn't
great
realize we had
animation.
this.
Yes, from
Yeah,
this is from Cameron, Slooh member Cameron um, Cameron McEwing, the person that showed us that gave us that beautiful lunar surface diagram earlier. So this is an animation of the prominences from our solar telescope. Look at them,
yeah.
like
This was
they
taken
bubble
over
like wicked children.
virtually a whole day. But if you go back to the scale of this thing, Page, um, the one at the top that we're seeing kind of arcing over, I think I calculated that day you could fit about 50 Earths inside that huge amount of plasma there. I mean, the scale of these things are utterly astonishing, let alone the kind of energy that they can release. And if those release into a flare or a coronal mass ejection and they're pointing towards Earth, then it causes all sorts of havoc to radio communications, our satellites. It actually heats up our atmosphere, which expands the atmosphere, which means that low orbiting satellites, they actually have to boost them up. Otherwise, they start getting dragged back down
Hmm.
into the atmosphere. But look at these ones as well. These are terrific, aren't they?
Yeah, it's something out of a movie. I love it, and I love when you put the Earth scale next to it. I think that's
Yeah,
just so, it makes it so relatable to
yeah,
be able to say like, look how, or not relatable actually, because it's so hard to imagine the size of these things.
it
um,
is.
so something that we said we were going to talk about in a few minutes, which we're at now, is why day and night are not exactly 12 hours each when we're on the equinox like today.
Yes.
So can we pull back up the equinox Earth diagram, the Earth illumination? So equinox, and you would think from the name that it means equal, and it also another name for equinox was like equinautical point or something. So it very much suggests that day and night are supposed to be equal today. But then there's something else called equilux, which is when it actually is equal, and that doesn't have to be on the equinox, right?
That's right. So equinox equal night. So everybody thinks, day and night are the same. But actually, in the northern hemisphere, day and night were the same duration, or hours of daylight, say, and nighttime were the same 2 nights ago. For people in the southern hemisphere, it's going to be in a couple of days' time. And there are two factors that cause this. The first one is, as we've seen in those solar telescope live stream, the sun has an angular size in the sky, which means that when we see the sun, it's the moment that equinox is measured by is the center of the sun. But of course, we can still see it. So tonight, when the sun sets, the time of it, we're still seeing half the sun. So we've got more daylight there. But we've also got this thing called atmospheric refraction. And we see that kind of exemplified because of the altitude of the observatory page. So what's going on with atmospheric refraction?
So we can pull up, I think, maybe the dome cam to help. I don't know if it'll help. So basically, and we talk about our atmosphere a lot because we talk about it a lot too when it comes to eclipses and rainbows and all sorts of ways that our atmosphere gets in the way. So our atmosphere is not a vacuum, right? It's full of gas particles and dust, and these things get in the way of the light that is trying to come to us. And so if you step out of the earth for a second and picture it in the sun's path of light, you'll see that the light from the sun is actually bent around the earth and it refracts through the particles in our atmosphere, the dust and gas particles. And so this can affect when and how we see the sunlight. So an example would be if you're at the beach and you're watching the sun set. Right when it starts to go below the horizon, you'll actually see this refraction. You'll see that the light from the sun bends to us a little bit longer, and you'll see the sun a little bit higher than it really is above the horizon, even though it's already set below.
So that is why that on the day of equinox, the hours of daylight and nighttime are not equal. There you go. We're 2 days late for this show, Paige.
I know. We are technically, yes. Yeah. But you can,
this was, so this is what you call equilux rather than equinox. So equal light. Is that right?
Right. So coming up, we have, in a short break, Paul and Helen Avery will be back to talk about the equinox celebrations and traditions around the world through the ages, the different cultures that study it, and also remember that tonight is the supermoon, the third and final supermoon. So we're also going to watch the sunset and the moonrise a little bit later with special guest Dr. Mike Shaw. And it's the worm moon tonight. This full moon is called the worm moon. And so I think you and Helen will be talking a little bit about that too. So let's jump to a quick break and get you and Helen back on. Stay tuned.
Equinox and Supermoon, and I'm delighted to welcome Slooh storyteller Helen Avery. Good evening, Helen. Well,
Good
it's afternoon
afternoon.
over there, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here, and it's spring. Well, it is here anyway.
I know.
Officially.
Does it feel like spring over there, or is it grey and horrible like it is over here in the
No,
UK?
well, I'm not far from Paige because I'm in New York City, and it's a really beautiful day. It's not as warm as I would like, but I can't complain. The sun is out.
Are you seeing the first signs of spring? You know, because we had a short-term warm spell a couple of weeks ago, and suddenly all the trees have got buds on, or more the daffodils and snowdrops and everything else coming up. Have you got the same over there?
Yeah, you get them a lot earlier than us, actually.
Right.
I've noticed some snowdrops and crocuses up, and actually, this is called in terms of the full moon, it's the full worm moon, and that's taken from the Farmer's Almanac, which was sort of the name of the Algonquin people who were sort of near me and a bit more north, and it was called the worm moon because the soil was started defrosting, the worms come up, and you'll see the robins, a lot more robins out looking for worms. And I took my dog to the park yesterday, and there were robins everywhere. So yes, spring is
So
coming.
definitely in the air. Now, talking about equinox, you know, we're kind of celebrating it today, but really we don't celebrate these things as much as maybe our ancestors did and have done down millennia. So, where are some of the traditions? Where have they been? Where people have celebrated equinox way back when?
Yeah.
Helen?
Yeah, well, it was it was different. The earliest records we have are from the Babylonians, and the equinox was the vernal equinox was very important because it actually marked New Year, which makes far more
Yeah.
sense than the Gregorian calendar we have where New Year is just January coming again, because life is starting again and there's fertility, and so it was a really really big celebration, and one can assume that's why a lot of sites and monuments were built to try and capture the equinox, because it was seen as this time where you could start growing things again and eating again, and life was coming back again, and then sort of you're much more sort of spiritually connected probably back then. It was this seen as this time of good overcoming bad. The dark nights had gone and light was coming back in, that kind of thing. And that sort of tradition of the New Year survived through a lot of the sort of pagan cultures of Romans and Greeks, Egyptians, and it's still celebrated today as New Year. So you'll see, I don't know if you have, but I was witnessing some events last night in New York from the Iranian population in New York. They're jumping over fire because it's still New Year for sort of the Persian population. And
Okay.
I was reading today that 300 million people celebrate New Year on the vernal equinox still today. So it is really important.
Wow.
Yeah, we just maybe just don't think of it. And then of course there's
It, it
still sort of people. Sorry, go on.
it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it, to kind of celebrate New Year on really when days are getting longer. The outlook, you know, you've just been through a cold, harsh winter with very little fresh food. You know, you've probably eaten through all of your supplies. It's a great time to start celebrating.
Yeah, it is. And even if you're not, um, but Persian or celebrating New Year today, it's still fun to celebrate. You've got 1,000 people at Stonehenge today, for example,
Yeah.
who are sort of honouring
Although
this
they didn't
tradition.
see the sun. They didn't see the sun this morning because it was cloudy, Helen, unfortunately.
I'm sure they still had a good time banging drums and
Well, you were
wearing
due to be there,
feathers.
weren't you? So, you know, there is a huge community of people who still celebrate it at these very ancient sites. So who's going to somewhere like Stonehenge on an equinox or a solstice?
Yeah, here we have this. And who wouldn't want to go, to be honest, if you
Exactly.
end up looking like this? Admittedly, it wasn't like that today. And the same in Chichen Itza, I think at 4 p.m. local time today. Chichen Itza, I mean, it's stunning. And why wouldn't you want to see this? Whoever you are, whatever your
Exactly.
traditional religion is, there's a pyramid there that at the bottom has these stone serpent heads. And the way the shadow falls on the light of the spring equinox for 3 days around it, it makes it appear like there's a shadow that looks like it's the serpent's body winding down to the head. So a lot of people go and look at that. Also, there's a temple in Malta, the Manujra temple, It's 5,000 odd years old as well, that people go to. But even small things around England, like Hitching Stone was set up for the spring equinox. And for me, I would go because it's just a chance to sort of connect back to sort of the seasons, and also remember your ancestry, and that people have been here a really, really long time. We've been screwing up the planet a really long time. So
Well, exactly. But, some of the other things, you mentioned kind of how we measure the seasons nowadays. This is all of these places that you're mentioning: El Castillo, Karnak Temple as well, Stonehenge, of course, Angkor Wat as well. One that Paige is going to talk about later on with Dr. Mike Shaw, Hovenweep Castle. All of these things were designed to tell the time so that they could mark the season, so that they would know when to start planting crops. They think that, oh, look at that, there it is. I mean, who wouldn't want to be there? But you think about the way that even we in our lifetime would mark the seasons, and that would be when you went shopping, because you'd have seasonal fruit appearing. You'd have strawberries during the summer. But nowadays, with global commerce, and supplies, that's gone. There's no seasonality in the food that we tend to buy. So we've kind of lost all of these markers, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. I mean, unless I sort of just, unfortunately, I have a small yard and birds come to the yard, so I can start to see the seasons changing, and I have a gauge of where we are because of what the birds are doing, basically. So if you're sort of near nature, it's hard if you're in a very urban setting to sort of see those signs, but they're there. But I did want to ask you, Paul, I'm fascinated by these archaeo-astronomical sites. As you say, there are many around the world, and Paige is going to be talking a bit later to Dr. Mike Shaw about one in the US. But how did they know back then where, what day the equinox, or even the equilux that you mentioned earlier, was?
It's a lot simpler than it might sound. And there are 4 things, I think, that allowed them to do this. One is time. They didn't have to extrapolate one day's observations to somehow work out when this was going to be. They would take measurements or make observations, and they do that year after year, decade after decade, which meant that they could narrow down the certainty of these things. But how did they actually make those observations? Well, 3 things, and we can see it actually in the images that we've already seen: sticks, stones, and holes in walls. So all you actually need is a couple of sticks, or even a couple of things on the landscape, a couple of landmarks on the landscape, and you see where the sun rises or sets in relation to both of those. In the case of sticks, most of those are gone, but that's what Stonehenge was replacing. It was replacing a lot of the timber henges that used to exist around Europe. And all of those, they would not have been done instantaneously. They would have started out with a couple of marker stones or timbers. In the case of Stonehenge, it's the heel stone is the kind of hub of all of these alignments. And all they would do is line 2 sticks up. Imagine lining 2 sticks up every day of the year. And what you'd see is the sunset would slowly go north after the equinox today. The sunset is going to be moving north, and then it'll be stationary. When it's stationary on the sunset, that is how they would mark solstice. Solstice means that it's stopped, the sun has stopped on the horizon, before it then tracks back down, goes through another equinox, before it then goes through winter solstice, where it's very low in the south, and our days are shorter here in the northern hemisphere. So it's just the alignment of a couple of sticks. It's as simple as that, Helen. But my word, I mean, they really made something big out of it, though, didn't they?
They did. And it's funny, we think we're so clever, but actually people have been doing this a long time with just sticks and stones. So
exactly. And you mentioned the Babylonians earlier. I mean, they were taking and making the most precise astronomical observations thousands of years before Western culture started to make the equivalent kind of accurate observations and measurements. So there are some other things on there. Just before we finish off, there's a couple of things that Equinox marks, which are coming up, aren't they? Are there religious things coming up?
It's true. We don't even think about equinox really, but it's the first full moon after the vernal equinox is Easter. It's also Passover. Some years that'll be the second full moon. So it's kind of an unusual one this year because you've got the full moon on the same day as the spring equinox. So if you're feeling that Easter, if you're in a country that celebrates, has the national day off, is feeling late this year, it's because you've got to wait a whole another full moon cycle for it to happen. So yes, we still use the equinox today for non-pagan religions.
Mark these things. And you mentioned, full moon and supermoon. Supermoon actually occurring on the day of equinox. It's the first time this has happened for over 30 years, would you believe? But Helen, I hope you are going to be joining us a lot more. I know you've been incredibly busy this year and at the end of last year. So Slooh, you should have seen the buzz in the Slooh membership and on Twitter. Helen's coming on live. So please don't stay away too long. Come back and join us again very soon. Thank you very much for sharing your insights today. Make sure you get out, have a look at that sunset locally if you've got a clear sky tonight, and watch that supermoon coming up. So thanks for joining us, Helen. Now, coming up after this short break, Paige is going to be back with astrophotographer and author Dr. Mike Shaw, who's going to be sharing some unique stories from his favorite trips, chasing solar and lunar events, including that one that we spoke about earlier, the Hovenweep Castle, which is an absolutely astonishing and fascinating astronomical observatory, or so we think. They'll be right back after this short break. Bye for now.
Joined very happily by Dr. Mike Shaw. He is a special guest for today, scientist, professor, author, astrophotographer. We're so excited to have you, Mike. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here, Paige. Thank you.
You have over 30 years of experience photographing the night sky, and I bet you have some awesome stories. And we're going to talk about a couple of them. But just to keep our viewers caught up on what we're doing, we are watching the sunset very quickly. Look at the screen. We're watching the big orange orb go behind the bushes at Pico del Teide and the Canary Islands. And so we are losing our solar scope for the night, but that's okay because as the sun sets, we are watching the moon rise because tonight is the third and final supermoon of 2019. And so we're going to be going through some of the observatory feeds to catch all of this. But Mike, we have you here, and I really want to hear about some of your awesome stories. Coming off of the last segment with Paul and Helen, they were just talking about different ways that our ancestors have marked these sort of events like equinoxes and solstices. And so specifically, you have a really great experience at Hovenweep. Please correct me if I'm not pronouncing that right, but I'd love to hear about that.
Well, thanks for asking about that, Paige. Certainly, the there's a it was a fantastic project. And first of all, I just want to say thanks for having me on the show this evening. And I wanted to say a happy Nowruz to my Persian
Lovely.
friends. And the story that we have for the Hovenweep solstice really takes place if we could bring up um, the time lapse sequence before playing it. But this was an event wherein the essentially this project happened many years ago when I was actually on assignment for my first book. I was out in the desert Southwest, and I was looking for doing some night photography of some great sites, that one of which was Hovenweep National Monument. I was kind of dimly aware of the fact that there were these petroglyphs that marked the summer solstice, but I wasn't really sure where they were. So I went ahead and just kind of noted them in my notes and went about my way. And I ended up at Hovenweep National Monument around sunset, and I was trying to find a camping spot. So I went into the visitor center and asked them, about the lay of the land. And the ranger, I ended up talking about these petroglyphs, and the ranger was like, "Oh yeah, we have those here. They're right here in the park." I'm like, "You got to be kidding me!" So we only had a few minutes before the visitor center closed. So I went ahead and
Mhm.
got the information, and then it turned out to be right down the road. So I set up my camp, got everything all set the alarm for the following morning, and then I got up, got my stuff together, and headed out down the road. Slight problem. Here we go. Slight problem was that there was a 2 mile dirt road that I had to travel down, and the gate was locked because it had been raining
Oh,
the days beforehand. Yes, and so I hadn't taken into account the time delay for hiking down, or jogging, I should say, down this road. So off I went. It was fine, and when I arrived at the spot where the general area where the petroglyphs were, this is a desert. This is the high desert, so there's no trees. There's
Mhm.
just a bunch of bushes and rocks scattered around. And what I wanted to say is this is one of the first moments when I felt this connection with the folks who produce these petroglyphs. Because as I'm looking around, like, where would I have put this petroglyph rock,
Mhm.
so to speak, if I were to put this in a place? um, Having done this for a number of years, you kind of get a sense of the types of rocks, the types of placements that make sense. And I just set off, looking for this thing. And time wasn't on my side. I was actually kind of trying to beat the sunrise with the hike down the dirt road. And I saw the rock. I thought, that's got to be it. And so, sure enough, it was. And after finding it, I then noticed that I looked down and there's a sign that says this is the rock. So that was fine. But I scrambled down there, set up my cameras and so forth, with great expectations. Not really sure what to expect. I hadn't seen any footage of this thing. And the
Mhm.
event that you're about to see compresses about 7 or 8 minutes of real time into a short time lapse video. And what your viewers may be able to see on the screen in the middle part are three spirals that have been
Mhm.
etched into the rock with some sort of a tool. And we'll go through how this process takes place. But what happens is, right about the solstice, as Paul and Helen were just talking about, you have these shadows that combine to produce what are called sun daggers, because they look like
Mhm.
blades of sunlight that kind of come in from the left and the right simultaneously and pierce the centers of these spirals. And in fact, that's why they're there, is to mark the summer solstice. So why don't we go ahead, and if we could, we can play the time lapse, and we can keep it playing while I explain what's going on.
Look at that. Right through all three spirals. Helen and Paul were just talking about how ancient astronomers used to mark these events with sticks and stones. And here we are. They probably used sticks to make the spirals or stones to carve into the stone rock. Yeah.
Yeah,
This is
it was
incredible.
it really is. And this was and while this was taking place, I was again kind of on a bit of a schedule because I was trying to beat this sunrise, and it was really kind of I felt like Jodie Foster in the movie Contact, because I felt like I'd gone whoop back in time, and I was standing surrounded by my friends who had just put in these marks, because this is next to the Holly House castle or
Mhm.
structure from the ancestral Puebloans in the Hovenweep National Monument Park. And it just really goes, I mean, it's impossible to construct this setup because the structures or the stones are just too large. But this really goes to, I think this is one of the themes of today's Equinox or Equinox show, and the Supermoon, is the predictability of nature and the And
Hmm.
here I am 1,000 years later, standing in the exact same spot, seeing exactly the same phenomenon. And I felt even now I'm getting goosebumps. I felt this powerful connection with these folks who had observed this phenomenon, recognized its significance, and managed to mark it. And that mark has endured through. It's like the things that Helen and Paul were just talking about, Stonehenge,
Hmm.
temples around the
Right.
world that mark these archaeo-astronomical events, and just spectacular. It was just a very moving experience to see this. It was absolutely quiet. I was the only one there, no one around for miles, and just to see this, I felt like it was sort of a movie event where I could just feel these astronomical events, just like tonight's supermoon, moving into position right on schedule. So it was,
Right.
and in fact, if we pull up the next, if we have time, we can pull up the image that shows oh, here we go, the actual
Hmm.
setup. You can see the rock on the right in the lower left there's a vertical overhang, and then to the east of that rock with the petroglyphs, is a second rock that actually shows the sun rising behind it. And essentially, what happens is that as the sun rises over the easternmost rock, the shadow from that rock simply drops down and reveals the three spiral petroglyphs. And this only happens around the days of the summer solstice. So fortunately, I happened to be there at the right time. But nonetheless, it was an experience I will never forget, and I'm happy to share that.
That's fantastic. And I think everybody watching is probably A, super jealous, and B, adding this to their bucket list because I certainly have. It's incredible.
Well,
The
well,
studio can
thank
go
you. We all
ahead and
have
pull
some.
up any feeds.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just telling the studio to pull these up so we could take a look as we're watching. The sun has set and we're waiting for the moonrise. So we're going to be looking between like our panorama and our dome cam. Also, if you're watching at Slooh.com and you watch the all sky, you'll be able to see the moonrise in it. Pico del Teide has the shadow. So if you're looking at the observatory feed that we have right now, coming up. There it is. You can see the shadow of the Pico del Teide right across the ground, pointing straight towards the horizon. And so that's where you're going to want to watch for the moonrise because that means the sun is setting right behind Pico del Teide. This
That's a
is a site too
beautiful.
to add to your bucket list.
It really, believe me, it's right up there. I haven't been to the Canary Islands yet. A good friend and colleague of mine has a workshop there every year, but seeing this, he's produced images of the anti-solar point, the anti-crepuscular rays lining up, and to watch the full moon rise at that point due east, as we were just hearing about, is just would be a spectacular sight to see. So definitely, and we all have our own bucket list, but that's certainly one of them.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful sight.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't been either. So far only Paul Cox gets to go.
Okay.
I
Well, lucky
know. What
Paul.
is about? What is this about, Paul? He's in the studio
Definitely.
listening to me go on about how he's the the famed traveler of the group.
Right, right.
Um, but yeah, it's really gorgeous. We're so lucky today because usually we don't do shows until it's nighttime and we're watching the night scopes in the Canary Islands, and so this is a unique one for us to get to watch the sunset and moonrise. This is our Canary Dome cam. So you can find all of these also if you're following along at Slooh.com and you go to the telescope pages. And then underneath of our main show, you can see the all sky cam. The solar telescope is obviously offline right now because the sun is set, but in the all sky cam, we'll start to see it dim too, and we'll see the stars come up. And as we
Mhm.
transition from sunset to moonrise, you have another really awesome story about a supermoon, which is fitting because today is the third supermoon of 2019.
Yes.
And so we can pull up, yep, there it is. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, definitely. This is one of my favorite images, Paige. Thanks for bringing this one up. This
Yeah.
is a photograph from May of 2012. This shows the May 2012 supermoon setting behind Mount Whitney, which is the tallest mountain in the continental United States. And I think the supermoon first came into vogue around 1979, but didn't really kick in until 2011 in terms of the public lexicon. And so I was thinking, okay, if I can take an image of the supermoon juxtaposed with Mount Whitney, which is the tallest mountain in the continental United States, how cool would that be? So the vision I had, and I think it came pretty close here, was to somehow produce an image showing the moon dwarfing the mountain, really diminish the size of the mountain. And to do that, of course, I had to set up the camera a significant distance away. And
Right.
that was actually a little bit easier than it might sound because the Mount Whitney is part of the Sierra Nevada mountain crest. It's a
Hmm.
north-south escarpment, and the idea was to find a spot, you know, far enough away from that to the east that I could actually line up the moon setting. And unfortunately, there was a dirt road that was set up out there. But here's the challenge I'd like to put to your viewers. And this is something that's often a fun game to play. And Paul had mentioned early on about the beginning of the show about finding a high location with a view to the east and a view to the west. But I'd like to ask your viewers if they were to hold out their hand at arm's length, and with their thumb and forefinger estimate how big is the moon? You know, is it this big? Is it this big? I mean, how big is it? Because once you find that size, then you find yourself like me, driving around trying to find things that you can use as a subject to have the moon rising behind. So I'll tell you
Right.
the answer in a minute. But when you're up
Okay.
at this high hill in a situation like this, like tonight, and if you're in North America and the moon hasn't come up yet, you might get your family and friends together and just play a game and say, who's the first person to spot it? Where's it going to come up? How long is it going to take to clear the horizon? And you could have like little friendly wagers to see who can get the right answer and stuff like that. But so anyway, with this particular case, so I wanted to set up my camera far enough away, and I ended up at a spot 15 miles away. And as you can imagine, the lineup was pretty crucial. But fortunately, I had technology, I had my GPS, I'd done my calculations, and on Sunday, May 6th, the morning of the supermoon setting, I watched the moon coming down. I watched the moon coming down, and I realized that unfortunately I had failed to take into account the fact that sea level moonrise, time of sea level moonrise, and the spot of sea level moonrise is not the same as the time and spot of Mount Whitney level moonrise. So I missed it entirely. And the moon set about 2 miles to the south, about 45 minutes early. All my exposures, I have a beautiful image of the supermoon silhouetted against some random mountain peaks. That's not what I was after. So this was
Right.
in the days before unlimited data, stuff like this. So I had to go back into town, conveniently find a parking spot across the street from a familiar free Wi-Fi source. I'll hop
Okay.
on the free Wi-Fi, do some more calculations, drive back out to the campsite. This time, everything worked out. So you have the image that you see here, and it was just a great
Great.
experience to watch. And again, this is the predictability of nature, the symmetry of nature, to know that you can
Hmm.
actually, I was watching this moon coming down, coming down. It's like, should I relocate? It looks like it might miss it, it might not miss it, and it just slipped right behind Mount Whitney. And it's just such a again, it's a kind of a moving experience to watch the
It is.
um,
Yeah.
nature. And you're a scientist, you know the feeling when you see things conform to a mathematical model that you can use to make predictions about future events with high degree of fidelity and accuracy. It's just a remarkable experience, and to see nature behaving in that way. So, so for those of you who missed the supermoon rising tonight, well, you can also watch it setting tomorrow morning, just like this image.
That's yep. And that's something we've never really thought about doing is maybe we'll have to do a supermoon setting show sometime. We've only
Yeah.
ever really done, either like rising like today or when it's already up in the sky is what we usually do. But maybe we'll have to get into some moon setting shows. Um,
And
we're still looking back at our Canary Islands live view from the observatory. So if you're looking at this image or this feed, you see the triangle. It's the shadow. It's the Pico del Teide shadow because the sun is right behind it and the moon is going to rise just above that point. But if you look a little bit to the left, you'll see like some white dots. Those are our domes. So for our viewers just
mm,
who are watching the domes open earlier, that's where the domes are located. And so this camera is up higher on the top of the mountain. And yeah, those are the Slooh domes. So we
very,
are,
very, very
yeah.
nice.
All right. So Paul Cox in the studio says he can see the moon.
Ooh, let's see if we
Let's
can see that.
see. I
And by the
know
way,
I'm
Paige,
having
just
trouble, but yeah.
just before I forget, the answer to the question that I found for the size of
Oh
the
yeah.
moon, for
Uh-huh.
those interested, is that I find that if you look at the size of the fingernail on my pinky finger, it's about half the width of that at arm's length. So I drive around like this. Like, does that look like something I would actually shoot? And I often like, hit my wife or, stick out the window. But it's actually much smaller than people think. And this goes to the moon illusion about things, the moon appearing
Mhm.
large next to the horizon. But no, I'm looking, I'm searching the horizon, and I can't quite make out the moon just yet. But that is certainly something
So
that. Oh,
Paul has suggested that he sees it in like the orange layer. And I think I do too, but I'm not positive if I'm looking at the moon or if I'm looking at something else and I think it's the moon, but I'm pretty sure I think I see the moon. So if you kind of like right from
maybe
the tip
so.
of the mountain, it's like a little bit left. It's like
A little bit left. Yeah, there's
a
a
white
tiny little
dot.
thing there. Yes, I concur. You spotted the
All
moon.
right. Yeah. We spotted the moon. We'll see it rise pretty quickly. But yeah, the moon illusion is something that I've always found really interesting. And it's fun, especially around full moons and supermoons. Everyone says, like, especially in the community, like the professional community, like, oh, supermoon, it's not really that big of a deal. Like, why does the media make it such a big deal? But I
Right,
swear
right.
I get a lot of texts from my friends on supermoon days, like, have you seen the moon? It's so cool. Um,
Yes.
and it is part of that moon illusion, but whatever gets
Mhm.
everybody looking up is good with me.
Oh, I agree completely. I mean, it's a fun thing because the there I know of what you speak, and the supermoon. It sure sounds better than perigee moon, and it's the sort of thing that people can relate to because it's certainly
Mhm.
as I'm sure you've talked about in past shows. It's really not significant. I mean, it's like what is it, 14% larger in diameter and 30% brighter, but the thing that's exciting and that provokes people's imagination is the fact that it is larger and there is this change in the moon. It's not this thing that it's almost up there with the fact that the moon often rises during the afternoon, and people think the moon only comes out at night, and
Right.
sometimes we just don't
Right.
see it. But they don't.
Right.
It has to do with the whole predictability of the moon phases and things. So I'm all for it. I think it's a great thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, we're watching it. So we just switched to our dome cam, and so now you can see we were seeing it, Mike. That white little orb
Oh,
that we
there it
saw
is
was
for
the moon.
sure.
Yep, there it is, right in the
Very,
orange
very
layer. Yep.
high.
It's perfect. And you
Yes,
can even see, you can make out the shadow too from Pico del Teti. You can see the point of the shadow.
definitely.
And yeah, so, and like you said, the predictability and the orientation of the Earth, Moon, Sun system. So we know where the moon is going to rise and when,
Mm.
just by following the orbital motion. And every time there's a full moon, the sun is setting directly, behind it. So where the sun
Oh,
sets,
yes.
the moon will rise directly where the sun came from. So it's
Yeah,
an easy one.
it's an easy one, and this is something that I think. And now looking at the image, just to be clear, the fact that the observatory lies to the left of the mountain shadow is the reason that the moon appears to the left of the mountain shadow, not right at the peak of it in the
Right.
observatory image. But
Yes.
you're right. I mean, it's a great question to ask your friends. You could say, "Hey, what time of day does the full moon rise?" And people will look at each other and like, oh, I don't know. I mean, I have to look. It's like, well, it's right at sunset. Just like you say, it has to happen at sunset. And this
Hmm.
is one of the great things about these monthly full moon events is that you can go up to a hill. I often take my students out there on field trips, and we just, have a little picnic and watch the sunset, and then play that
Yeah.
little game talking about like who can see it first. It's kind of a game and
Right.
that sort of a thing.
Right.
So it's a lot of fun.
We can really see it coming up now. Definitely, you can make it out
Definitely.
above now because now it's above that orange layer of the
Yes.
horizon. But just like you said, yeah, it's always fun to say, the moon is not only lit up when it's visible to us, it's lit up all the
Right.
time in some
Right.
portion. And just to think about that, like to kind of take it out of a geocentric, out of your head and sort of
Mm.
remember that there's
Right.
other ways to view things from outside the earth.
Oh, yeah,
Totally.
definitely.
And
You
it's
know,
all
there's so
these, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
It's like
Sorry.
when you're in the subway and it's like, no, you go, you go.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it's like exactly when you go to some of these experiences, like the ones you've had, and the transcontinental solar eclipse, and that was really it for me. That one, that it's really humbling, and it really puts into
Yeah.
perspective, where you are. And we have your image from the transcontinental solar eclipse as
Okay.
well. I couldn't not talk about this one.
No,
This is
I
just
don't know how
so
much time we
gorgeous.
have. Yeah, but I don't know how much time we have. We'll definitely come back to this potentially in the future. But this was a
Yeah.
great, 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 great project. I mean, just like anyone else who saw the total solar eclipse
Mhm.
last year, transcontinental solar eclipse, this was a phenomenal, phenomenal experience. I mean, and this particular trip was a image just in brief. was this was a joint project with my friend and colleague Babak Tefreshi from the World at Night project. And this was the concept was to photograph the total solar eclipse over the Grand Teton Mountains. And if you look right below the eclipsed sun, you
Mhm.
can see the Grand Teton Peak itself. Now, as people probably especially who saw this, you can appreciate the fact that the eclipsed sun, at least this was in Wyoming, of course, occurred at around 11:30 or so in the morning at in a direction just east of south. And if you're familiar with the Grand Teton National Park layout, it has a similar construct as the Eastern Sierra, that we have a north-south line of mountains,
Mhm.
and the most popular viewing is from to the east of that, so you're facing west. And it's impossible to photograph the total solar eclipse from the most common. So, long story short, I had to do this um, fairly fairly grueling early morning hike into the backcountry with a bunch of cameras and set the thing up. And fortunately, everything went according to plan. Like I said, I'll tell
Good.
the story later on when we
Yep.
have a bit more time. But what's
Yeah.
interesting
Okay.
about this image, just in case the viewers are curious about it, what you see here are is a composite image. So everything's made from the same tripod location, and the key was to capture the partial eclipse phases using a
Mhm.
solar filter equipped camera, and then right at the moment of totality to remove the filter and to photograph the total solar eclipse. And then when totality ended, and then of course when the goosebumps and the travel through time experience ebbed, to replace the solar filter and capture the rest of the partial phases, but then to keep the telescope or keep the camera on the tripod in the same tripod location until later that night, and then photograph the night sky from the exact same position. So I haven't touched the camera except to change the batteries, and then to blend everything together artistically, because this is in some ways captures my feeling of the night sky being opened up by
Mhm.
the process of the eclipse and then closed again. So it was like traveling into outer space during the day, and it was just a remarkable. But there's some funny stories about this one. Getting to and from the point of observation that are worth going through some detail. But it's a great image, and I really appreciate you guys showing that because it was one of my all-time favorites. This is
It's
a great
ours also.
experience.
We will definitely have you back to tell us those stories.
Well,
I'm
it
excited to
makes
hear
sense.
them. But it's just
Hmm.
another beautiful dance of the Earth, Moon, and Sun system, which is really what we're celebrating here today on the equinox and supermoon. So, well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Your photography is out of this world, and we
Thank you.
love hearing the stories behind it. We look forward to having you on again very soon. And we will be back in just after a short break, me and Paul Cox, to wrap up and with that very special announcement that we told you about. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. You were just listening to Dr. Mike Shaw, our very special guest of the evening. He is an excellent astrophotographer and an author, and I hope you caught that segment. If not, you'll definitely want to rewind and watch, but we will have him back on very soon in the future. He's so great, and we really enjoyed talking to him. And now Paul and I are back just to continue watching the moon rise. We can definitely see it now right next to the
Paige,
point of Pico del Teide.
you know me with these things. We haven't done this before. All right, we haven't tried
No.
to see the moon in the dome cam before. It's so nerve-wracking because I didn't get a chance to kind of do any kind of dress rehearsal for this. It's a one night only kind of thing. And bang, we see exactly what we set out to achieve. That's the live image stream that that we've zoomed in on a little bit. But can you see this particular kind of strange shadow coming up on the horizon? We will see that same shadow, which is actually of the Earth's atmosphere in Pico del Teide. But I would just like to add on to what you said there. Two superb guests tonight. What a fabulous show. And if anybody is interested in seeing any more of Mike Shaw's astrophotography, it's www.mikeshawphotography.com. He has got some spectacular images over there. So hop over there after the show as well. I was trying to hunt down his anti-solar point, which is this zodiacal light thing, but kind of in the opposite direction, which you can pick out. It's called Gengershine, countershine, and it's once again it's these dust particles, but in the opposite side of the sky. I'm so glad, Paige. Sorry, I'm just going to talk about this because I was going to ask the studio to bring this up. This is our live panorama from the observatory. So some of our feeds are looking like, our dome cam is in the shadow. It looks really dark, but Pico del Teide cam is still in the sunlight. And here you can see why. So down in the bottom left, you can see the sun is still setting right behind Pico del Teide, but then cast your way up to the top left, and that's looking east, where the moon is rising, but the sky is still too bright in this. But there we see this full 360 degrees of our horizon tonight. But this also goes on, doesn't it, to what we said earlier. The altitude of the observatory. We shouldn't be able to see the sun and the full moon in the sky at the same time, but we are basically seeing below 0 degrees altitude on the horizon, because we've got that altitude, and of course in the sun's case, that refraction that we were talking about as well.
Right.
But come on, Paige, we have kept people waiting long enough. What are we teasing tonight?
Oh, part of me wants to just and we'll be back after another commercial break. Because the TV, I don't know, the TV does that to me all the time. Cliffhangers. But yes, okay, you want me to say it or do you want to say it, Paul?
No, you go.
I'm about to burst. So, if you've been following along, you have heard various times that we've teased about the new Slooh, a new platform, something to do with curriculum, if you're an educator. And if you haven't been following along, we've been sort of telling pieces of this little story. Well, big, actually huge story. It's not very little, but we haven't given out very much information. So you haven't, missed the major announcement yet. This is the major announcement, but I'll start with the backstory because I'm just going to keep people waiting. Last January 2018, Slooh was awarded an NSF Small Business Innovative Research Grant to create a curriculum suite around our observatory for using Slooh in the classroom for teaching students of all ages to learn how to explore space. And this project spawned a whole new idea for Slooh and a new way to revolutionize what we're already doing. And so we're so excited to announce June 1st, 2019. So not a year, this June, almost 2 months away. We are launching Slooh's revolutionary. Yes, it is. It is almost 2 months, 2 months and 2 weeks. Yeah. So on our end, it's coming really quick. But we are launching Slooh's revolutionary new platform. This was created with support from the National Science Foundation. And it is going to be a brand new redesign based on the age of discovery in astronomy, our ancient ancestors who studied the stars before us And we're just really excited to teach you to explore space in a whole new way. We also have a teaser show coming up. So in April, on the 18th, we are going to do a teaser show and share with you a little bit about new Slooh. So you're going to want to pay attention. Pay attention to Slooh. All eyes on Slooh for the next 2 months.
Yeah, and we've got so much new content there. And we have mentioned a couple of target dates before today, but this is the whole of the Slooh team, our huge engineering and development team, and people working around the world on this as well, have all committed to June 1st launch. And part of what I'm involved with at the moment, alongside our new ops manager Andrew Dumbleton, is we're creating a whole stack of new content, a lot of guides, which are, the whole thing is going to be so much more informational. There's going to be a guide for virtually everything, and it's all linked back to our Slooh 1000 page, which is this curated list of the best 1000 objects to see in the night sky. And of course, we've got an observatory in Chile, Southern Hemisphere observatory too, which means that you get to see the entire sky. But also, because it's Slooh, we've got the historical perspective of all of those objects as well. So on every single object guide page, we've also got a kind of little historical perspective from what are called the Burnham's books. And it's a series of 3 enormous volumes. I think every Slooh team member has got a set of the Burnham's books. And we've had special permission to use that on each object page, so that you can also get this historical perspective of how these objects were looked at during the early 20th century as well. Oh, look at this page. Oh, you know me, I get distracted with a
there's the shadow
picture.
you're talking about.
Exactly, and you get these anti-shadows and all manner of things coming up, and this is basically the shadow being reflected back into the upper atmosphere. That's what we're seeing. So I don't know if we can see this in. So if anybody is just joining the show, that is actually the moon rising, and Pico del Tedi's shadow reaching over to the eastern horizon, and there we can see it in Pico del Tedi Camp. And viewers should watch this over the coming nights. As each night goes on now, the moon will rise slightly, later and later. But this view is always available on the telescope pages, the live telescope pages. But Paige, so going back to the new Slooh, our launch on June 1st, you've also got a couple of educational programs, which is kind of going to be a second tranche of content, new types of content as well. What can you tell us about that?
So we are going to have 3 different educational programs, 4th to 12th grade, high school and university level, and then an after-school program. And you can find more information on our website right now under memberships. And you can contact me if you're an educator through those forms, and I can give you more information, and we can get started talking about using Slooh in your classroom. But these programs are set so that educators with either a ton of astronomy knowledge or with little to no astronomy knowledge can teach observational astronomy in their classroom, whether it's middle school, high school, university level. If you run an astronomy club at your school or at a planetarium, observatory, anywhere, we are creating a suite of tools to help you educate your students, to help your students learn how to explore the night sky and to understand astronomy topics from observational astronomy research. So how can we use telescopes to teach things like gravity and orbital motion? And it's really exciting. It's all in a gamified fashion. We will do a little bit more on this later. We'll put out maybe we'll do a special education teaser show in addition to the general teaser show in April. But this is all going to be set and ready to go for your fall semester beginning. So if you're an educator, reach out to us now. We're really excited about it. And then so we have one last. Oh, go ahead.
Exactly, Paige. I was going to say, with all of that, then wouldn't it be great if we get some new telescopes as well?
Yeah. I wonder if there are any.
Well, we have We've hinted about this in the past as well, but we have now got some pretty firm dates on this. There's a lot of work, a lot of civil engineering work actually that needs to be done because we're on top of a mountain, basically in the middle of the desert. Oh, look at this live video stream from the dome cam. That is astonishing. I had no idea we were going to get anything like that. But anyway, sorry, pretty picture. You know me, I'm a bit like a dog with a squirrel. Yes. All the civil engineering work is being done for this because it's on top of a mountain, basically in the middle of the desert, in the Emirate of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. And the civil engineering work is about to start. We have laid out the site. We've got some great drone aerial 3D models of the entire site. I might even share a bit of that in the Slooh discussion boards as well. But what we're going to do there is the two domes page that we saw tonight, Dome 1 and 2, with our half-meter 20-inch telescope and our 17-inch telescope, that is going to be replicated in Sharjah. And of course, Sharjah is further east than the Canary Islands. So that means for the schools, that suddenly brings forward nighttime by 3 or 4 hours, well into the school working day, even on the east coast of the USA, let alone the west coast, who are probably going to have live telescopes and Slooh for the entire school day. So pretty exciting times. And the date for this that we've got at the moment is, I haven't booked my ticket yet, but we are aiming for October, which is good news because that's out of the Emirates summer, which can reach about 140 degrees. So it's still going to be pretty hot over there, but we're really looking forward to that and working with our partners over there as well.
This is all such exciting news. I'm still about to burst. And I'm jealous that you get to go. I was just saying to Mike Shaw, I was like, Paul is the one that gets to go to all these places.
I heard, but you know,
that's because you have the knowledge.
But I also saw I have the equipment as well, and I saw that Mike has some good equipment as well. So unfortunately, Paige, I think you may have done yourself out of an observatory trip because I saw Mike's equipment that he's using, and I want him over on one of the observatory trips so he can start taking images like this. Look at this. This is a great one probably to end on, isn't it, Paige? This is the supermoon, the full worm supermoon rising above the Canary Islands with the shadow of Pico Deltadium. We've already seen sunset in the Slooh Solar Telescope about half an hour ago. So
I guess we should wrap up. It's been a little bit of a longer show than usual, but a really exciting one. Awesome guests, awesome chat. We watched sunset, sunrise, our fancy announcement, and so keep all eyes on Slooh for the coming months. Get excited for the teaser show in April. Not least, but last, I guess there is a total solar eclipse in July that we will be live streaming. There's some information about that already up on the site. We can go into that in detail another time, but we're looking forward to that too. A lot of exciting things happening in 2019. So
stay
with us. Yeah. All right, Paul. Well, thanks for sharing this with me. And it's still early here, but I guess it's wine time for you.
It is wine time.
All of you actually had sunset for yourselves already. I'm still waiting for the sun to set here.
Okay. Thank you, Paige. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Bye-bye.